Hello and welcome, guys, to the first episode of the brand new Gamers Academy YouTube channel. My name is Outlandish and I played this game competitively for 4 years, but now I decided to become a coach and partner up together with Gamers Academy to provide you guys educational content. If you would like to book some individual coaching sessions with me or one of my colleagues, you can visit us on gamers-academy.com. You can find the homepage in the description below. We would like to make you become the best players possible. That's why we're providing free content on this YouTube channel, so it's accessible for everyone. And this journey starts today with a 12.8 MSI patch rundown. I will explain you what it means that the specific champions got changed, what it means for the meta, what you can play in solo queue, and what changed competitively. I hope you enjoyed this video and leave some comments below. As I mentioned already before, we're talking today about the 12.8 League of Legends patch, which is the patch for the MSI tournament we have in a few weeks, one of the biggest tournaments we have in a competitive environment. So a lot of champions got changed, and I will explain to you what it means for solo queue and for the competitive environment, and maybe you can implement that for yourself in your solo queue. Let's start a little bit about with the Mordekaiser changes. The passive is that you have like this aura around you, and like as soon as this is activated, you have a movement speed buff. It changes from 3% depending on your level to 6 and 9%. It's actually really huge because especially like when you watch Champions Queue, some people, or I think one person played it in jungle. It was a flexible champion, and the movement speed buff gives you the chance to like rotate fast between your camps in the jungle. So the more movement speed you have, the faster you clears in the later stage of the game, which is in my opinion a really cool buff for Mordekaiser jungle. But even in the laning phase, if you like activate on top lane the Mordekaiser passive, you have so much possibilities to with more movement speed to like deal with the champion. Like if you get ganked, you have more escape possibilities. If you like try to turn a gank, you have like more movement speed to stick to your enemies. So it's a really cool change, and I think Mordekaiser is in a really good spot because like it's a niche champion that you can pick against tanks, and it's not like a blind pickle champion that's like super broken or something. So I think like a buff like this makes a champion really interesting and buffs his laning phase. But even if it's jungle clear, so I'm really excited to see that if it has no huge impact on that, or that you like start the scuttle before you gank, and then like with the movement speed buff you can reach the gank faster. So it's a really cool change. The second buff we have is the Vladimir buff. I think this is just a basic stat buff, like buffing an armor of a champion. Just implement tries to how to explain that. It's like it's better to have like armor in AD matchups. For example, if you played mid lane against something like Kiana or something, or Tryndamere, which was really popular recently, having more armor in laning phase is really strong. It's a good buff, I think, for Vladimir players. It's the same as Mordekaiser, really neat champion. There are some one tricks that are really good on Vladimir that like have a lot of impact on the game, but I think it's not the champion that's like the pick or ban champion. It's really niche. Same for Mordekaiser. So buffing his armor is really good in AD matchups. So for him, a better tool to have more sustainability and more defensive tools in early game, which is really good. I think the biggest change we have in this patch is the Poppy buff. I think it's really interesting to see because Poppy was in the past meta seen a lot, especially like in jungle. If you think about like the end of 2021 or the beginning of 2022, there were still like some Poppy players in competitive that they were really successful, but it dropped out of the meta as soon as like something like Hikari, Volibear got more and more popular, and they got more and more stronger in the meta. So I think this change is really interesting because reducing her cooldown by 4 seconds is actually a lot. This is an insane buff, but I think even more interesting is the ultimate change they made, because like not only buffing her knock-up duration, it's more about the knockback distance from 2,400 to 3,400. If you think about it, like if a Poppy, for example, ultimates you around Baron, there is a chance that you can like rejoin the fight, because 2,400 range wasn't that much, but like 3,400, like I think the impact of this ultimate is so huge now, because you can basically not rejoin the fight anymore unless you have like a champion with 1,000 dashes. But I think this is a really strong buff, and her ultimate has so much more value now just because of this change. So I'm really excited to see that actually. The next buff is really interesting as well, I think, because like I'm a big Sejuani enjoyer, but I don't think it's that much of a change for jungle Sejuani. It's more about like top lane Sejuani. If you remember it, like a lot of people picked it, had a strong laning phase. It had a really strong ganking setup to like just funnel your junglers with ganks, and playing on top lane or like how top lane dynamic works. Like people try to look in lanes for for trades, and they need to calculate how good of a trade they can take to influence their lane. And like reducing your passive cooldown to 6 seconds in later stage of the game is a lot, because like her passive guarantees her like so much resistance and better trades obviously for her, and like reducing that cooldown by 50% on a certain point of the game makes her laning phase a lot of stronger. Like early game obviously it doesn't affect that much the laning phase, but like later stage of the game it's really strong buff. The next one, the Fiddlesticks buff, I think is just more like a comfort buff. I think Fiddlesticks is the same compared to like Mordekai's a really niche champion, especially like in solo queue. There are like some one tricks that play it. I think like healing more against champions is a cool buff, but it doesn't like change the game completely or like make the pick super broken, because we have something called Grieving Wounds, and the items reduce the power of healing so much that like it doesn't affect Fiddlesticks that much in my opinion. I think, as I said, it's a cool buff for like one tricks that like have fun to play the champion, be annoying around the map, but I don't think it's like, and now every competitive coach will think, oh my god, Fiddlesticks is so broken, we need to pick it. It's just like, I think something comfort-ish. The next one is actually pretty funny, because if you look at the picture, the Zoe with the O with a meme, I think like Zoe is a really tough champion. I think this champion in the right hands is super broken. Like people that have a lot of experience on the champion are really strong in early game. They can bully the enemy mid laner so hard. It has like this random factor as well with the spells she gets from minions and stuff. And I think Zoe is pretty hard to balance. I think a really good Zoe player will have a lot of impact in the early game, and reducing her mana cost by 10 for the Q spell is actually huge, because she gets basically with that free cookies. She has more mana. She's not relying that much anymore on her mana, and every five spells she gets 1 Q for free. I think this is actually a really strong buff for her early game, and I don't think this should be the state of the game where Zoe should get buffed. I think like Zoe struggles more scaling wise against other champions, but in early game she is the laning bully. So buffing that phase of the game is a really interesting and brave decision by Riot, but let's see how it implements in solo queue and competitive. The next one is the Kassadin shield buff. I'm honest, I need to check up some skill orders and like some other streamers that reacted on the patch, because I wasn't that sure if you even max Q. Like I think like many people did like 2 or 3 points in Q and then maxed E. So but Q max was viable in situation where you get poked too much in lane from AP range champions, for example, something like Victor, and now having bigger shield power gives you the opportunity to not that you're not forced to max Q, that you can just like sustain the lane with 2 or 3 points into Q and then still max the E. Doesn't matter in which matchup you play. So I'm not 100% sure on that fact. We can discuss about that in the comments. I'm not the biggest Kassadin expert, but I think it's just like a really strong buff regarding the sustainability of the champion in laning phase, that you have like 20 damage shield more in early game makes your trades a lot easier. I think like the champion is untouched in late game. Okay, it's 20% damage more, 20 damage more, and like a 10% more AP ratio. That's actually a good buff. But I think where Kassadin struggles is a lot like in early game laning phase. People get the champion is punishable until level 6, and they adjusted that by maxing his like shield power. So I think against AP matchups, a really big buff, and we keep an eye on that if it changes the current meta too much, but I don't think so. Vel'Koz change is, I think, overtuning the champion a little bit, because I feel like Vel'Koz was in a really decent spot already in competitive. For example, I watched a video from Veiga V2, I think it was, where he explained that Vel'Koz is really good into tanks because of his true percentage damage. So I think he had a really good spot already, but they decided to buff Vel'Koz even more, which makes him a really powerful champion in my opinion. His range and his poke in the later stage of the game is insane, and like buffing his AP ratio is always really really difficult to balance, because at a certain point of the game you have like so much AP, and 10% can mean a lot. Like 10% more, like if you have 1k AP you have 100 AP more ratio on the Q. So I think it's actually a really good buff, really strong buff for Vel'Koz players, and already really strong in the meta if you can utilize it good into tanks and if you're comfortable playing this champion. The Xerath buff is, I think, for me, like my most favorite one, because like it's a really specific buff. It's not like that they're overtuned his poke or something. It's not, they're not buffing something he's already really good at. They're buffing something that is not easy to hit, and not something that is super important for his champion dynamic. Like Xerath is just like a missile. He's like poking from a lot of range. His E obviously gives a gank setup, but it's not like something super reliable, and buffing is the stun duration is actually really interesting to me. I think it's a cool buff, buffing it to 2.25 seconds, 2.5 seconds, based on distance is a really cool mechanic, I think. And yeah, it's just a cool adjustment for all the Xerath players. I think the next one is we can skip a little bit. I think like reducing the cooldown ultimate by 20 seconds is, especially like for Ezreal, I don't think that big of a deal. It gets reduced by 15 each level. I think it's a good adjustment, but it's not like changing the champion too much. But like for Sylas, I think like reducing the cooldown on level 6 by 20 seconds is actually a lot. That you can like use your ultimate in a span time of 160 seconds is actually a good change compared to 200 seconds. After that, we have like 2 ADC changes, which I think is really interesting. I'm always really afraid of having base stats buffs. I think it's hard to balance base stats. What I mean by that is like if you buff AD per level, it scales a lot with items, scales to late game. I think this is already a really big change. Having 0.3 AD more in level 1 laning phase, and that scales per level, is actually a lot. And gives Tristana the possibility to like get played again. I think Tristana wasn't that comfortable in the current meta right now, but people already wrote on Twitter that Tristana probably gets back into mid lane with the changes. Having more AD in laning phase is always really profitable for her, and it's a really strong buff for her. The Jhin buff, I think it's a really good adjustment. I think that Jhin was a bit forgotten in the past patches, as soon as like champion like Xayah, MF got more into meta, Zeri, stuff like that. Jhin was a bit forgotten, like in the like last competitive environment we had a lot of Jhin players and Jhin picks, but after that, as soon as like these like Xayahs and MFs came into the meta, Jhin wasn't that popular anymore. So they adjusted that by buffing the champion a little bit, the CC duration, the E cooldown. I think it's just like, for me, like a psychological buff, like seeing the champion in the buff list, reminding players again, okay, Jhin exists as a champion. Not sure like if it changes too much the dynamic we have right now in competitive or in solo queue, but I think it's a cool champion. It deserves some love as well. And yeah, the last one I think is really crucial. I'm not the biggest fan of the Bard buff. I think like for every high elo solo queue player, playing against Bard one tricks is one of the most annoying things you can play against. The champion is already not relying on his laning phase at all. He can just perma roam and like create chaos on the map. And like one of the highest ranked players in solo queue is a Bard one trick. The champion is in right hands already really, really strong. He has a lot of impact on the map. He has really good damage, and now they're buffing his passive damage by 5+2 per 5 chimes, which scales a lot. Beside that, they're even buffing his healing, but I don't think this is a super big change. I think it's more about the passive damage that they're buffing. I think it's not really the right direction. Obviously, Bard is not the champion that gets picked competitively or something. It's an MSI patch, so they wanted maybe to have more Bards on competitive. I don't know what like their intention was, but I think for solo queue, I mean, every Bard one trick is happy about that, but I don't think that the champion needed any buff. Let's talk about the champion nerfs. I think the most interesting one from them is the Soraka nerf. I think like nerfing Soraka, which was really over present in the past weeks on different roles, top lane, mid lane, ADC. I think support obviously. The champion was, in my opinion, overtuned in the sense that the champion was too flexible, had too good stats, and like many people were not really good at punishing her. I think obviously in solo queue it's really hard to punish a Soraka if you don't have the right tools for it. And you see, you've seen it obviously in competitive as well. For example, in PG Nets recently, or in EO Masters, where people played Soraka just on ADC because the champion has an insane scaling. You can just neutralize the lane and have impact from level 6 onwards around the map. Makes the champion really annoying to play against. And now they reduced the healing, which is, in my opinion, a really, really good nerf, but I don't think it will destroy the champion. It's just 5% AP ratio and 5 healing less. scaling levels. And but I think the biggest nerf is like late stage of the game, where you like jump from 140 healing to 210, but with less scaling. It's really good change, but I don't think it will necessarily destroy the champion. Let me know your opinion in the comments. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think no one is really upset about it. It's Raka gets nerfed. The Jinx nerf is, I think, really big as well. Like reducing an ADC's HP by 50 is actually a lot, because like in general, like with trading patterns or how you work in the lane, is that you try to calculate how much trades you can take, how many times you can attack the enemy champions, and like how much damage you can take. So having 58 HP less is obviously a big nerf for her, because she, like every player, needs to calculate again how much trades you can take. And I think it's a really big nerf, and Jinx was really over-present in the past meta, so I think it's pretty obvious in which direction they want to go. Like for MSI, they didn't want to see like this blind pick Jinx or like Jinx in every draft. Not 100% sure if they followed like the recent competitive environment, because I feel like Jinx wasn't that present anymore like in the past weeks. If you watch your Masters, champions like Xayah or MF got more and more popular, and like Jinx didn't fall through, but like she wasn't that picked as much anymore, and like new champions came to the new hype, as I said with Xayah. So not sure if it's like really the right direction they go, but I guess they just didn't want to see Jinx anymore. I think they're referring more to LEC and to NA, not with EU Masters and regional leagues, because in regional leagues, as I said, like Jinx wasn't that popular anymore, I think. Yeah, but let's talk about the Xayah hype train. As I mentioned already, like Xayah was really strong, or is getting really strong in the meta. More and more people picking it. She has a really cheap item build with lethality. It has a really disgusting mechanic, just like to pull people from like 3000 range with her Q, and having like the possibility to disengage every hard engaged champion with one ultimate. I think it's a really strong champion right now in the meta, and they adjusted that by nerfing the damage on a Q and a cooldown. I think this is a really good change, and I don't think it will completely destroy the champion. I think like having 20 damage less in late game is obviously a nerf, but I don't think that people will jump off the train. And as I remember correctly, people always find a solution how to make the champion viable. And again, I think like Xayah will still have some presence in the competitive environment. But yeah, just for you to know in the solo queue matches that you have less damage on your queue in early game and late game. And yeah, I think the champion adjustments is something we can talk about in a separate video. I think I would like to talk about the Swain changes a lot with you guys together in a different video, because the champion will change a lot and it's dynamic, especially like on support. So it's really interesting to talk about that, so we have more time for that. I would like to thank you guys for listening for this first video. It was my first YouTube video as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and leave some comments below so we can discuss about the opinions and the champion changes we have currently. Thanks for watching the first episode on the brand new Gamers Academy YouTube channel. If you liked the video, you can support us by liking it, subscribing our channel, or even activating the bell. If you would like to discuss with me about the current patch or give me feedback about my first YouTube video with the patch rundown 12.8, leave a comment below, or even join our official Discord server. You can find the link in the descriptions. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time. Bye bye.